This is Nadia for the NMEA podcast, the adult education podcast in New Mexico. I'm here today with Rebecca Sherry. Hey, Rebecca.
Hello.
Yeah, so I'm going to try. So, you know what? I didn't ask you for a bio, so I'm going to go off on what I know about you because we're colleagues, right? Rebecca has been in the field for 20 years in New Mexico. She's an ESL teacher. She has a lot of experience with curriculum development. She likes green chili sushi. Very all really important stuff for the community to know. So, Rebecca, I asked you here today because all of my experience is in HSC or pre-HSA, whatever program, if you even have distinctions. I've had ESL colleagues. I have heard your ESL concerns in different spaces, and I'm just not privy to that. And I think there's a whole world there that is important to talk about. So I'm just really happy that you're here today, so we can just learn more about the field, learn about you, and just chill, right? So why don't we start off? Can you tell me about yourself? How did you get into adult ed, like generally, not just New Mexico?
All right. So I'm going to tell you my story about this because I think it's funny in that a lot of us who become teachers in adult education fall into it from another career. And I think that I'm unique in that I did not fall into it from another career. So I grew up in Wisconsin in a very small town that looks very, very different from Albuquerque. Okay. It's a very small farming community, basically. And when I was in high school, I signed up for foreign language. My high school taught only one foreign language because it wasn't a very large school. They taught only Spanish. And my Spanish teacher went on maternity leave, and we got a long-term substitute, and she was actually an ESL teacher. And I was about 16 years old, and this was the first time that I even learned that career existed and what that was. She explained it to us one day, like what she did most of the time when she wasn't subbing, And when I listened to what she said, I thought, that is what I want to do. So I was like 16 years old, and I decided I wanted to be an ESL teacher. And the reason I was really drawn to it was because I loved Spanish class, but at that time I lacked the imagination to consider myself ever fluent enough to speak Spanish, or I mean, to teach Spanish. Like I could do it now, but I couldn't imagine how that could happen at that time, But instead I thought, like, she teaches English to a lot of people who speak Spanish and a lot of people who speak other languages. And I'm qualified to teach English. Like, I know that language, And so that was where that kind of came from. And that was my first step and interest into this profession. It was not like a smooth path after that, but at least that's kind of where I got the idea that this is what I wanted to do. And so I took some twists and turns in my journey and lived in several states in my 20s, and taught English in most of those states while I was doing that. And eventually ended up in New Mexico. Originally, I started working in Las Cruces for Doña Ana.
Wow. Like you said, you don't always hear people who not only choose to be an adult ed, but also choosing at such a young age. That's amazing. Yeah. So just to refresh, what is your current role right now? Where are you working?
Okay, so right now I work for CNM here in Albuquerque, and I'm an instructor. I teach all kinds of ESL classes within our adult basic education program, and also within our ESOL program, which is English to speakers of other languages. And so that's more for people who are at a little bit higher level than adult basic education. But the primary classes that I teach at CNM are the ones that are IBEST, which is ESL for students who are in the early childhood education program, and they are Spanish speakers doing the Spanish speaking certificate in early childhood education. So,
oh wow,
yeah.
So just to reiterate, so your program differentiates from ESL to an ESOL?
Yeah, there is some differentiation. Once students kind of graduate from the ABE program, ESOL is sort of their next step that they can take before they go into full college classes. And some of the ESOL classes are also full college classes. So it
Wow.
kind of depends. Yeah.
So I know that ESL has like what, 6 levels generally, right?
Mhm.
So would ESOL be like the last like 5, 6, or is that something like so out
It's
of
above
there?
5, 6.
Okay. Wow. Not that you probably know the answer to this, but I'm curious as to why they have a different, they use ESOL instead of ESL, because I know that in the English teaching field, there's so many different acronyms that we use.
So ESL is not really the preferred acronym in our field anymore because it stands for English as a second language. And so many of our students actually speak more than 2 languages. And so it's kind of not very fair to them.
Yeah.
But it is the acronym that's frequently used in New Mexico in our programs. ESOL is English to speakers of other languages, and that does not automatically mean that it's like a college prep program. It's just a different acronym. Okay. And the K-12 system uses ELL, which is English language learner.
So does the K-12 system also use ELL for their, like you're an ELL teacher? Or like
I'm not 100% about that because I have not taught that in the K-12 system, but I would say a lot of times I think they're listed as English language development teachers, so ELD teachers.
Oh my goodness, so many E something, right?
Isn't that something? Yeah.
I've also heard like EFL,
That's
English
English
to
as a foreign language.
English as a foreign language.
Yeah. And so a lot of times in this country, we don't teach EFL because this is an English speaking country largely. It's English speaking with other languages. Okay. But if I go to teach English in Mexico, then I would be an EFL teacher because it's a foreign language, just in the same way when I learned Spanish, Spanish was a foreign language to me.
Oh, okay. I'm getting it now. All right. So if I go to a professional conference, right, as a representative of my organization, and I'm checking in on some of these, if I use ESL, would I be seen as kind of someone who's stupid, or is that something, or out of date, or do you think that's just a normal kind of
I don't think you would. I don't think people are going to judge you that much. But I will say that if you give a presentation, I mean, people might prefer other languages. That's all.
I don't know if I'll ever be at a point in my career where I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna go teach ESOL teachers how to something. Oh man, because I've never worked in ESL. That would be ridiculous. But yeah, okay, that's good to know. Okay. Or maybe not stupid, maybe just like really out of touch, perhaps is the better term here. I guess like when I think about, I'm trying to think of like an example, and the only thing I can think of is if an HSC teacher comes up to me and asking, well, are you teaching books on tape or something? I was like, tape, sir. Sir,
it's not quite like that. It's a little bit more like, originally our field was probably designated as ESL and GED. And now there have been some adaptations to that based on different things that, different ways things are presented. Not all of our HSC students complete the official GED exam anymore, for example. Right.
Yeah. From what I've been hearing, talking to other practitioners, is that because they already have that credential in another, in their home country, they just need to buff up their English skills? Or is that more of like, it's not a necessary path, or a required path rather?
For the ESL students to get an HSC credential?
Yes.
That's a really complicated question.
Yes.
It's because what happens is it does benefit some students in various ways to demonstrate that they've completed a credential in the United States. employers, for example, often give more credit to a credential completed in the United States, even if it's the HSE credential, over a bachelor's degree that was completed in another country. There's also questions of the cost of getting your transcripts translated from another country. So it may be cheaper to pay for all of the HSE exams than to get your credentials translated. And that depends because the credentialing services are private. So it depends on how much you pay for those and stuff like that. So
Wow.
so there's a lot of factors in there. There's also the factors related to scholarship, because students who graduate with an HSE in New Mexico have scholarship opportunities within our state institutions that their degree from Mexico would not have granted them.
Interesting. Do you know of so I know that there is this push and this kind of relatively recent is it getting people kind of the scholarship to study in New Mexico at the college level. Right? That happened like a year ago, less than that. Is that only for people who have a credential in New Mexico, or does that does not translate to people who have a high school diploma in their countries?
I'm going to be honest with you. I don't want to fully answer that question because I don't do financial aid and I don't want to give people wrong information.
That's fair.
You would be better off to ask that to like a institution or HED or something like that, just because I deal with the students after they're in classes.
Right. No, that's a good point. I'm glad you're just like, I don't want to direct people the wrong way. But yeah, I mean, because my program is launching ESL, I should figure that out at some point just for my students' sake. But yeah, really, thank you. So you talked about how you got into the field and that kind of that inspiring sub that you had that kind of put you on this path. Is there what currently drives you?
For me, I really feel like teaching and teaching English is a question of equity. There is, all languages are created equal, but in this country, English serves as a tool to opportunities and to things that people want to pursue and do with their lives. Okay. So when students can pick up those skills in English, and skills in English is a thing that I have that I can share with them. When they can pick up those skills, it gives them more equitable opportunities in this country. They're not, and I mean, just to like give you a really concrete example, job interview is a perfect example of this. Someone interviews for a job and they're interviewing for a job to be a preschool teacher. And, they're interviewing against someone who just finished high school in the United States, but has lived in the United States their whole life. And so when they walk in and do that interview, they have English with an American accent. I have students in my program who actually were preschool teachers in their previous country, like in Colombia, for example. Okay. And have several years of experience. Sometimes I even have students who were program directors or school directors. And yet when they walk into that interview, if they can't convey their experience in English that the employer understands, they will get overlooked possibly in favor of someone with much less experience and qualification.
It's always really disappointing to hear, but you kind of know that's the reality. So you see your work as creating equitable opportunities for people.
It's helping my students access equitable opportunities and giving them that like kind of last step to take advantage of what's available in this country, the opportunities that are available to anyone, but not having English as a barrier or language as a barrier to those opportunities.
Yeah, I've always thought of teaching, and particularly because I've only worked in adult ed, mostly I've been thinking about adult ed, is teaching as an ethical field or needs to have ethical values. Because, and I'll be honest, I have not been the best employee in a lot of situations, maybe not a lot, but like not worked as hard as I do in adult ed. Like, but me being a crappy receptionist, okay, maybe that means people get their emails takes a little longer, or their mail or whatever. But being a not great teacher means you have an effect on so many lives. Like,
Yes.
you can be the deciding factor if someone goes to college, if someone drops out, or if someone has to spend more time looking for a different program
Mhm.
because you were not good at your job and you didn't try enough. So that's why I was always like really hyper aware of like the effects, and good and bad. And you
Right.
you brought up this good point, because you're giving your students an ESL, and not just you, of course, others, you're giving them that opportunity to be able to reach other goals, to be able to get into other fields. It could be something as small as just helping their kids with their homework. It could be that person becomes an engineer in America, right? That they could not have done without that step of learning English better. I'm gonna
Yeah.
say that because that's assuming that everyone's in your classes don't know much of English, and that's not true.
No, it's not. I mean, there's a wide range. Like we have students who are beginners, we have students who are advanced. And I think it's interesting that you mentioned the idea about how this plays out in family dynamics, because always one of my favorite stories that a student and her family actually shared with me was when I taught in southern New Mexico. I taught in Anthony, and I taught citizenship and English at that time. So I was helping people pass their citizenship. And she passed her citizenship, this student that I had had for some time, and she invited me to her ceremony, which, if you've not had the experience, regardless of your feeling about the politics of the country, it's a very moving experience to go to the citizenship ceremony. And while I was there, I met her daughter, and her daughter said, the way I know that my mom has learned English is that she would ask me before, like, where I was going, for example. I would answer her in English and she wouldn't understand what I was saying. And I think this was like a teenager strategy. And she said,
Mm.
now my mom asks me, I answer her in English, and she knows what I just said. And I always feel like that was such a demonstration of what it means for a student to improve their English skills. That's not measurable on a TABE exam or a CASAS exam. It changed their family dynamic, though.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
You know,
And also being able to be that parent who knows what your kid's doing, that's such a big thing.
yeah.
What I was thinking about when you're talking about the different levels is, and I didn't even remember this or reflect on this until recently. So most of my family growing up was actually immigrants. So I technically consider myself first generation, even though my mom came here as a baby, because all the people around her growing up instilled in her these like really immigrant values and mindset. Sometimes I'm like, Mom, I don't know why you're thinking like this. You've been here forever. And one of my uncles married this woman from overseas, and so she came over here when she was like 19, 20 years old. I didn't realize this until she's been with us for years now. So this happened when I was a teenager. And she mentioned that, like, yeah, I learned English in school. We all did, but I came here and I had no idea what you guys were saying. So it's a mix of like the difference in learning English as a foreign language in another country, from perhaps it could have even been from people in her own community, right? So it could have been someone who was speaking English, perhaps with an accent or with an affect that makes more sense in Arabic than it does in English. And then coming here and hearing all these New Yorkers just like the real foot. And so she was like, yeah, and we also learned British English, so I had to learn English all over again,
Yeah.
right? And just that struggle. And I can't believe I never thought about this until like this year, that I totally forgot this experience. But it's just the realization that there are just that whole mindset having to change. So maybe we do have students, and maybe my program will have students that have already learned it and they can read and write English fine, but as soon as you open your mouth, it sounds like gibberish. Or it's very confusing. And just having to put in that set that I have to relearn stuff all over again. Or even when you don't learn English in another language and you already know your language from home, and then you have to learn all this kind of quote unquote, like baby step stuff. as an adult. And that's so hard. I'm constantly in awe of adult ed students.
There's so many, I mean, you have so many layers in that comment, Nadia. Like, I don't even know where to start. Like, we could do an hour on each of those, just so you know. Like, but I mean, I think you brought up like some really important points. And one of the biggest points is that there is no immigrant experience. There's like these multiple varied immigrant experiences, and they look so different. And so our students' experiences do look so different. I have a lot of students who studied English in that sense of the way we would study a foreign language in this country. Did you study French? Did you study German? Did you study Spanish? Did you ever intend to actually use it?
Right. That's another good point.
Don't intend to use it. You study it in a way that's perhaps similar to studying algebra. I need to learn this so I can take a test, you know? Very different when you intend to use it.
Yeah. You're absolutely, yeah.
So I mean, that was my experience in learning Spanish, was I learned Spanish, I studied, and I did very well in classes. And I share this experience with my students a lot, but I would always sit in the back and I would be like, please don't call on me. Please don't call on me. I'm a good book learner. I would get good grades. Went to Mexico after like 6 years of studying Spanish. First thing that they asked me when the family that I'm staying with asked me, she's like, what do you want for dinner? She repeated it 3 times. I couldn't answer her. I didn't understand. That's not a complicated question. And finally, she just put food in front of me, and it was like, that was my first day in Mexico.
Wow.
And it was really interesting to me. And so I talked to my students about that a lot. And I'm like, this is why I want you to speak with me in English every single class period, because I don't want you to waste your time.
I love that mindset, because that also translates to HSC. I don't want to waste your time.
Yeah.
So what does it look like? What's your effort look like? What can you bring? And let's just see how it goes. How can we work together? And that is tied into, and I feel like a broken record, I feel like I say this all the time, adult learning theory, which is really just principles, not really a theory, that adults need something that's relevant. Very basic, right? And I think that translates so easily from ESL to HSC, even to literacy. How is me spending time in this classroom going to be relevant to my life? Maybe it's something nice to learn, or it's something I'm going to use. And I'm leaning towards something I'm going to use. Unless, I guess, in the case of some of my students is, I'm going to lose my job if I don't get my GED. Which I guess in a sense that is using it in a different way. Yeah, here's my paper. I'm going to go get a paycheck. I'm going to go feed my family. So you said that I said a lot of things. Was there anything else that, and all the blah blahs that I just said earlier, that you do want to address?
Well, there's one other thing. And I would say, especially, and I'm just going to say this kind of to you because you guys are building an ESL program, right? But you should know that there's people who come into your classes with a lot of different backgrounds. And so some people will come into your classes in that they speak English really, really well, but their reading and writing doesn't match their speaking, because some people have time working in this country with colleagues who speak English in various fields. And so some people pick up a lot of oral language. And that's just a really interesting thing that I see happen a lot, is that your skills in one area do not equate with your skills in another area. And it goes in both directions. Depending on the original place you studied English, you may have really high reading, writing skills, and then really low speaking skills. So it's just something to consider.
No, absolutely. Thank you for that. It's something I've been thinking about, but I've been thinking about it more in the sense of comparing ESL and literacy, because the literacy class could have ESL students in it when they reach a certain point. But a lot of what I've been seeing in my org, and I'm not saying this about anyone else's, are people coming in who are American, who've been here their whole lives. It's just that for some reason, they didn't develop the reading writing skills that they need to move into, getting their HiSET or GED. Some of them are not aware of it, and some of them are. So like some of them are coming like, oh, I need a GED to go to college. And it's like, oh my goodness, you're reading and writing at a 3rd grade level. And not telling them that. We don't tell them that, but we tell them what they need to work on. But it's the reality is shocking. So that can look really different. And a literacy classroom is going to have all those different including those people, and then like the various ESL backgrounds that you bring up, which is really important to keep in mind. And I'm making a note to myself because I just to remind me to emphasize that with the teacher I'm onboarding. This interview will continue in part 2 of this episode. Thank you for listening to the Nemea podcast.